Hello and welcome to News Central TV. I'm Darshan Usman. Here are stories making headlines beyond the continent. We begin in America, where presidential debates hold significant sway in American politics. The upcoming Tuesday night clash between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, their sole scheduled encounter, may prove more consequential than most. Joe Biden's lackluster showing in the initial presidential debate in late June sparked a firestorm within the Democratic Party, ultimately compelling him to withdraw from his re-election bid. Now, Harris and Trump prepare to face off in perhaps their only debate before the election. For News Central, Afia Hagen has more.
Former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris will face off tonight in Philadelphia in their first presidential debate, as new polls show the race for the White House remains tight with no clear leader. With just 8 weeks until Election Day, the stakes are high as the candidates face questions about voters' top issues, including the economy, immigration, and reproductive rights, and as the candidates pitch their vision for the country. There will be no audience. The candidates' microphones will be muted when it's not their turn to speak, and they will not be allowed to have notes. It will be the first time that they will have met in person. The Trump campaign previewed some of the lines of attack that former President Donald Trump is likely to deploy in the debate tonight. The campaign argued that Vice President Kamala Harris owns everything from this administration. As she seeks to become the first Black woman and South Asian president, Harris will come into close quarters for the first time with a rival who will do anything to win and who has a history of using racial and gendered tropes for political gain. Trump has questioned her intelligence and race as a Black woman and has amplified a sexual innuendo about her on social media. But the vice president seems determined not to be drawn into his traps. Harris has a chance to change perceptions about her political acumen and to put down a marker for the sprint to November 5th. Tuesday is set to be a contrast of styles as well as political views. Although Election Day won't arrive until November, early voting is set to begin this month in some key battleground states, including in pivotal Pennsylvania. So while this debate could help set the political environment for the last 2 months of the 2024 presidential race, it will also be the last chance for the two candidates to reach some voters in states where every ballot matters. For News Central, I'm Afia Hagen.
Now we have Afia Hagen to speak to us on the upcoming event, talking about the debate. Afia, what can we expect from tonight's debate?
And that's really what everybody wants to know. What version of Donald Trump is going to show up this evening? Are we going to have an angry Donald Trump, or are we going to have a Donald Trump like we had in the debate with Joe Biden, who let Joe Biden essentially fall on his own sword? Now, some of the rules of the debate, there will only be 2 commercial breaks, and in that time, the candidates aren't allowed to speak to anybody in their teams or anybody around them at all. As we know, the mics will be off when there are no answering, so we perhaps won't have any interruptions, or if we do have them, they won't be as loud as what we expect. Now, this could be a deciding factor for voters, how both candidates perform in this debate. And so Kamala Harris, who is less experienced from debates as Donald Trump, who's done 7 of these in the past, will be looking for that killer line, will be looking for that viral moment like she had when she debated Mike Pence in the past with that "I'm speaking" when he interrupted her. Now, she has sort of backed away from interviews and one-on-one moments. This is really the time for her to step forward and show people who she really is.
Now, the key issues will be scrutinized tonight. Let's start with Trump. What can we expect him to say about reproductive rights?
Tonight is all about scrutinising those key issues. I'm sure that gun violence will come up, reproductive rights, the war in Gaza, immigration. But yes, reproductive rights is a really huge one. Now, Trump has boasted in the past of appointing 3 of the 6 Supreme Court judges who voted in 2022 to overturn Roe v. Wade, which basically ended federal protections for abortion. He said in the past that he's proud to have done it. And since then, Republican-controlled states have imposed bans or very restrictive new laws on abortion. Now, Trump was already out of the White House when the High Court's decision came down. So he didn't necessarily feel the backlash, but his party did. So he is now sort of swithering on that, offering a variety of positions and takes on the issues. The most consistent of those, most recently, being that abortion policy should be determined by each state. And asked what state policies he supports, he has failed to deliver a clear answer. Now, most recently, he's announced that he would vote against protecting abortion rights in his adopted home state of Florida, where he has a resort. Whereas Kamala Harris on this issue seems to be a bit more clear that she supports having wider abortion rights across the United States.
Okay, so how about Harris now? How will she address the war in Gaza?
And the war in Gaza is a really huge one for the Democrats and a difficult one because she's trying to kind of tread 2 paths here. Now, she has said in the past that she supports Israel's right to defend itself, but she's also said that she supports the creation of a neighboring Palestinian state and security for both. And she said quite recently that, what's happening in Palestine and in Gaza cannot continue as the humanitarian situation worsens. She's made clear that something has to be done about that. The problem with this is the Democratic coalition, as you say, are quite widespread and quite fragile. So she's trying to please a lot of people when she is talking about this particular issue. But it's one that, again, she has to set out her stall on, and it will be quite difficult for her.
Well, Afia, do you have any idea what each candidate have to do this evening to really resonate with voters?
When it comes to Kamala Harris, it's all about what are her views, who is she, how will she set out her stall, how will she be president, how will she be different from President Joe Biden, and how will her administration be different from the administration she currently serves in? That's really paramount for her. How is she going to take America forward? When it comes to Trump, he can't keep looking in the rearview mirror at what he did when he was president. He is very good at saying, when I was president, the Trump presidency and the Trump era was this, that, and the other thing. We are in a different era now. So he needs to be forward-looking and forward-thinking and tell people how he is going to take America forward as well. Both candidates can't afford to look forward. They have to look to the future. And that's what voters want. Voters don't want them barbing at each other, arguing with each other, picking on each other. They want to know what each candidate is going to do to make their lives better. And so the candidates have to set that out clearly, concisely, in a way that voters will believe.
Well, thank you, Afia, for that. Now let's bring you updates from the war in Gaza, where U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has called for fundamental changes in Israel's military operations in the West Bank after the killing of a U.S.-Turkish activist, Aynasir Ezgi Agi, during a protest last week. Blinken described her death as unprovoked and unjustified. He added that changes needed include revision to the rules of engagement. The incident has sparked tensions, and Blinken's comments highlights the need for a thorough review of Israel's military protocols in the region.
Her killing was both unprovoked and unjustified. No one should be shot and killed for attending a protest. No one should have to put their life at risk just for freely expressing their views. In our judgment, Israeli security forces need to make some fundamental changes in the way that they operate in the West Bank including changes to their rules of engagement. We've long seen reports of the security forces looking the other way when extremist settlers use violence against Palestinians. We've seen reports of excessive force by Israeli security forces against Palestinians. And now we have the second American citizen killed at the hands of Israeli security forces. It's not acceptable. It has to change. And we'll be making that clear to the senior-most members of the Israeli government.
Meanwhile, David Lammy has expressed shock over a missile strike in a humanitarian zone in the Gaza Strip, saying it shows the urgent need for ceasefire. In a joint news conference in London with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he says it is a critical moment for securing a ceasefire in Gaza, saying that deaths in Khan Yunis this morning only reinforces how desperately needed that ceasefire is. To further demonstrate their commitment to Ukraine, the British Foreign Secretary announced that he will travel to Kyiv this week with his American counterpart, Antony Blinken.
As the arrival doors opened, it was a new beginning, a second chance at life for children like Sanid Hani Muhammad, whose innocent laughter was silenced.
It is the first vote since a 2022 reform increased the number of seats in the House, reserving more for women and lowering the minimum age for candidates. Despite these efforts to modernize the legislature, voters and candidates said the Gaza war dominated the election. Tensions escalated further just 2 days before the election when a Jordanian gunman killed 3 Israeli guards at the border crossing between Jordan and the occupied West Bank, the first such attack since the 1990s. This has fueled voters' concerns on the ongoing war and that it will continue to strain the kingdom's economy until Israel and Palestinian militant Hamas reach a ceasefire.
أكيد الرؤية السياسية والوضع السياسي بالمنطقة بيأثر كتير على الناخب وبعطيه محفز إنه ينتخب ويلاقي الأفضل ويلاقي الإنسان اللي عنده البرنامج السياسي ضمن مع البرنامج الاقتصادي مع الاجتماعي كله متكامل. إحنا مرحلة كتير حرجة على الوطن العربي كاملة وعلى الأردن خاص وعلى الأردن وخصوصا على الضفة الغربية متمثلة في غزة. فمنطقة وضع حرج جدا فترة زمنية مفروض كنا نتكاتف في الاختيار الأفضل.
We go on a short break now. After the break, Ukrainian drone strikes will kill women in Moscow suburbs. Stay with us. Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Gaza's health ministry says at least 40 Palestinians were killed and several others injured following an Israeli airstrike on a designated safe zone in the enclave on Tuesday. Local authorities say more people are feared dead as health officials scramble to pull victims from the rubble. News Central senior international correspondent Adishawa Josh reports from Istanbul, Turkey.
Another bitter farewell to innocent victims of Israel's latest airstrikes in Gaza. Among them, women and children. Scenes of despair and sorrow like this has become pretty much a daily affair here in the enclave. But Rahid Mohammed, a father who lost 2 daughters in the attack, and others who survived say nothing prepared them for this assault.
كنا نايمين صارت غارات إسرائيلية عنيفة في المكان المجاور لنا.
أبوهم بالسجن وهم بالسجن وأنا أروح هذا للعشرة تلفون يا ربي. أمي بتقول لي بدي أشوفها البارح بدها تيجي عم بتشوفها إيش أقول لها أبغى؟ إيش أقول لها بنتك ماتت.
The Al-Mawazi IDP camp in Khan Yunis was designated a humanitarian safe zone for displaced Palestinians by the Israeli military. But on Tuesday, eyewitnesses say the Israeli military struck the same camp where thousands of Palestinian families are sheltering with at least 3 missiles. Israel says it targeted a camp to take out members of the militant group Hamas it suspects are hiding among Palestinian civilians. This isn't the first time Israel has attacked the Al-Mawazi camp. The IDF has struck at least 4 times this year. The UN fears the war could trigger a wider regional conflict and is calling on global leaders to rein in Israel's attacks in Gaza.
Ending the war and averting a full-blown regional conflict is an absolute and urgent priority. Equally, the wider situation of illegality across the occupied Palestinian territory, deriving from Israel's policies and practices, as so clearly spelled out by the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion in July, must be comprehensively addressed. States must not and cannot accept blatant disregard for international law.
On Monday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, a vocal critic of Israel's war in Gaza, asked the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, to form an alliance against what he described as Israel's expansionism agenda in the enclave. Egypt, Qatar, and U.S. efforts to broker a ceasefire remains elusive as the death toll surpasses 41,000, with nearly 95,000 people injured. The killing of a Turkish-American woman at a protest in the West Bank last week is the latest proof that the war in Gaza could trigger a regional conflict, as President Erdogan seeks the support of the OIC to stop the onslaught. It is unclear whether the OIC will act on President Erdogan's request, but his plea is an indication of how far some regional leaders are willing to go to defend their interests. Adeshewa Josh, News Central, Istanbul, Turkey.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has criticized U.S. influence in the Asia-Pacific region, accusing the country of fueling an arms race and creating conditions for a crisis. His comments come as Russian and Chinese warships begin joint exercises in the Sea of Japan. Moscow and Beijing have strengthened their military and economic ties in recent years, seeking to counterbalance the perceived U.S.-led global order. Putin's remarks reflect the escalating tensions between Russia, China, and the U.S. as the three nations vie for influence in the region.
Сегодня начинается его активная фаза, в ходе которой будут отработаны самые сложные, максимально приближенные к боевым задачи. Отмечу, что за последние 3 десятилетия мы впервые проводим столь масштабные учения на море. Они одновременно пройдут в акваториях Тихого и Северного Ледовитого океанов, Средиземного, Каспийского и Балтийского морей. Фактически США провоцируют гонку вооружений, не считаясь с безопасностью своих европейских и азиатских союзников. Формируют предпосылки для опасной кризисной ситуации в Европе и в Азиатско-Тихоокеанском регионе. Хочу подчеркнуть, Россия должна быть готова к любому развитию обстановки, а наши вооруженные силы обеспечивать надежную защиту суверенитета и национальных интересов России. США и их сателлиты наращивают военное присутствие вблизи западных рубежей России, в Арктике и в Азиатско-Тихоокеанском регионе. США и их союзники открыто заявляют о своих планах по развертыванию ракет средней и меньшей дальности в так называемых передовых зонах. В качестве приоритетных направлений для их размещения в том числе рассматриваются территория островов в западной части Тихого океана.
Планируется отработать задачи отражения крупномасштабной агрессии вероятного противника с океанских направлений, борьбы с безэкипажными катерами, беспилотными летательными аппаратами, обороны пунктов базирования военно-морского флота, ведения морских десантных действий и конвоирования транспортов с учетом опыта.
United States has confirmed that Iran has sent missiles to Russia, which are expected to be used in Russia within weeks. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken made the announcement in London, stating that Russia has already received the shipments of ballistic missiles. This move comes despite warnings from the international community. As a result, the U.S. is set to impose new sanctions to Tehran. The situation is escalating, and we can expect further developments soon.
Military personnel have been trained in Iran to use the Fata 360 close-range ballistic missile system, which has a maximum range of 75 miles. Russia has now received shipments of these ballistic missiles and will likely use them within weeks in Ukraine against Ukrainians. Russia has an array of its own ballistic missiles, but the supply of Iranian missiles enables Russia to use more of its arsenal for targets that are further from the front line while dedicating the new missiles it's receiving from Iran for closer range. In recent days, we've been sharing intelligence behind these findings with our allies and partners and working together to ensure that there will be significant economic consequences for Tehran's actions. The United States will be announcing further sanctions on Iran later today, including additional measures on Iran Air. We expect allies and partners will be announcing their own new measures.
Away from that, in Europe, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has criticized Germany's decision to tighten border controls, calling it unacceptable. Germany introduced temporary controls on its land borders with all 9 EU neighbors, including Poland, to curb irregular migration. The move comes after recent suspected Islamist attacks in Germany sparked public outrage and pressure on the government. Tusk's condemnation highlights tensions between EU member states on migration policy and border control.
Ja nie mam żadnych. Typu działania są z polskiego punktu widzenia nie do zaakceptowania. Bo przecież ja nie mam żadnych wątpliwości, że to sytuacja wewnętrzna, polityczna niemiecka powoduje zaostrzenie tych kroków, a nie nasza polityka wobec nielegalnej migracji na naszych granicach.
And that's all on Beyond the Continent. Send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number on the screen. Do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV, and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I'm Darshan Usman.